Natasha Hausdorff, a legal expert, provides context on discussions surrounding Israel and Palestine in recent months. She addresses common linguistic terms like genocide and apartheid that are often used without full understanding of their legal meanings. Hausdorff argues these terms are being misapplied to Israel as part of what she calls modern blood libels, false accusations against Jews and the Jewish state that echo historical anti-Semitic tropes. Hausdorff strongly rejects claims that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. She explains that genocide has a specific legal definition involving intent to eradicate a group in whole or part. This term was coined to describe the Jewish experience in the Holocaust and requires proof of genocidal intent. Hausdorff argues Israel's actions in Gaza do not meet this definition, and that applying the genocide label to Israel inverts reality and echoes anti-Semitic blood libels. She contends that Hamas and other terrorist groups crossing into Israel on October 7th did commit acts of genocide, as they explicitly stated their intent to kill Jews. She says accusations of genocide against Israel are particularly pernicious given the term's origins in describing Jewish suffering. She argues these claims are part of a propaganda effort to pressure Israel. Hausdorff acknowledges the horrific images coming out of Gaza, but says they must be understood in context. She argues Hamas controls information coming out of Gaza and has an interest in driving up civilian casualties to increase international pressure on Israel. She claims Hamas uses civilians as human shields and celebrates Palestinian civilian deaths as part of its strategy. Hausdorff states that Israel goes to great lengths to minimize civilian casualties, including warning civilians before strikes. She argues many civilian deaths are caused by Hamas rockets falling short or Hamas shooting fleeing civilians. She contends casualty figures from Gaza do not distinguish between civilians and combatants or specify how people died. Hausdorff argues the atrocities of October 7th were the result of generations of indoctrination and incentivization of terrorism against Israel. She claims Palestinian children are taught from a young age to hate Jews and aspire to martyrdom. She cites UN-run schools using textbooks that glorify violence against Israelis. She also points to the Palestinian Authority's practice of paying salaries to terrorists and their families based on the severity of their attacks on Israelis. She argues this creates a financial incentive for terrorism. She contends that addressing this indoctrination and incentivization is necessary before any peace process can succeed. Hausdorff explains key principles of international law governing military operations: necessity, distinction, proportionality, and precaution. She argues Israel adheres to and often exceeds these standards in its operations in Gaza. She claims many critics misunderstand the principle of proportionality, which is not about comparing casualty numbers, but weighing military advantage against expected civilian harm. Hausdorff contends Israel takes unprecedented precautions to warn civilians before strikes, even though this gives Hamas time to prepare. She argues Hamas violates international law by using civilian infrastructure for military purposes and targeting Israeli civilians indiscriminately with rockets. Hausdorff rejects claims that Israel practices apartheid. She explains apartheid refers to the system of racial segregation and discrimination in South Africa. She argues the term is misapplied to Israel for political reasons, as labeling a country an apartheid state can lead to international sanctions. She states that Arab citizens of Israel have equal rights and serve in all sectors of society, including government and the military. She distinguishes between Arab Israelis and Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank who are not Israeli citizens. She argues it's incorrect to claim Israel practices apartheid against non-citizens in territories with separate governance. Hausdorff explains that Palestinians have autonomy in the West Bank and self-governance in Gaza. She argues Israel does not fully control these areas, contrary to some claims. Hausdorff states that Gaza has been under Hamas control since Israel's withdrawal in 2005. In the West Bank, she explains there are areas of full Palestinian control, joint control, and Israeli security control based on the Oslo Accords. Hausdorff contends that without Israeli security cooperation, Hamas might overthrow the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank as it did in Gaza. She argues many critics falsely equate Palestinians in these territories with Arab citizens of Israel when discussing apartheid claims. Hausdorff criticizes the international community's role in perpetuating the conflict. She argues the UN Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, has perpetuated Palestinian refugee status across generations, unlike treatment of other refugee populations. She claims UNRWA schools use textbooks that incite violence against Israelis. She contends the international community has failed to hold Palestinian leadership accountable for promoting terrorism and rejecting peace offers. She argues this has enabled the indoctrination and incentivization of terror she sees as root causes of the conflict. Hausdorff acknowledges Israel is losing the propaganda war, with public opinion increasingly embracing what she sees as the terrorist narrative. She argues social media and news outlets often uncritically spread Hamas propaganda. She contends this shift in public opinion has put pressure on Israel's allies and emboldened its enemies. Hausdorff claims American pressure on Israel has prolonged the conflict by constraining Israel's military operations. She argues calls for immediate ceasefires play into Hamas's strategy and give it time to regroup. She contends misguided international rhetoric encourages Israel's enemies and makes peace less likely. Hausdorff expresses skepticism about the viability of a two-state solution in the current context. She argues years of failed peace efforts and terrorism have made many Israelis lose faith in this approach. She contends that addressing Palestinian indoctrination and incentivization of terror is necessary before any peace process can succeed. Hausdorff argues promoting a two-state delusion distracts from the hard work needed to create conditions for peace. She suggests this would require at least a generation of Palestinians growing up without anti-Jewish indoctrination. She points to the Abraham Accords as an example of how economic ties and de-radicalization can promote peace better than top-down diplomatic initiatives. Hausdorff challenges what she sees as false historical narratives underpinning some criticisms of Israel. She argues there was never an independent Palestinian state that was displaced by Israel. Hausdorff, who describes herself as the granddaughter of Palestinians, says the British Mandate of Palestine contained both Arab and Jewish populations before Israel's establishment. She explains the legal principle of ut possidetis, which she argues determined Israel's borders upon independence in 1948. She contends this principle means the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza were legally part of Israel's territory. She argues Israel cannot be considered an occupying power in these areas under international law, comparing it to Ukraine potentially retaking Crimea from Russia. Hausdorff expresses concern about recent pro-Palestinian protests on university campuses. She sees these as symptomatic of a broader problem where young people lack appreciation for Western liberal democratic values. She argues this has created a vacuum filled by extremist ideologies. She contends societies need to grapple with how educational systems may have contributed to this phenomenon. She sees addressing this as critical for the future of Western democracies and their approach to Middle East issues. When asked about Israel's long-term prospects given regional hostility, Hausdorff argues Israel has no choice but to survive. She points to Israel's history of overcoming existential threats since its founding. She contends Israel's role as a safe haven for Jews facing rising anti-Semitism worldwide makes its survival imperative. She argues Israel's citizen army, where most adults serve, gives it a unique will to defend itself. Hausdorff points to how Israelis, including Arab citizens, have unified in response to recent attacks. She contends this demonstrates the strength of Israeli society in the face of threats.